Hello, everybody. This is Ben, and I'm sitting here with Adam.
How you doing, Ben?
I'm doing well, man. A little bit tired. We'll talk about my inability to track my sleep and why that's going to be important. That'll be a great jumping off point here in a second. But how are you today? You've already coached 2 classes. That's been a productive morning so far.
Yeah, we've had a great Thursday morning. It's a little bit cooler. I think it was 65 this morning during the 5 and 6 a.m. So that was a nice change of pace, and hopefully that means we are moving into fall. Liliana brought up a great point. Houston's probably tricking us, and we'll have 90-degree weather in a couple days. I'm going to hold out hope that it's going to remain this temperature for the next couple of months.
Yeah, I would. I have no doubt the warm weather will be back. That's just the way Houston works. I mean, to think that what used to be acceptable fall weather would give us an actual traditional fall. I mean, that's a crazy thought here in Houston. So
Exactly.
I'm sure the humidity and the heat will revisit us. I mean, our winter isn't until February. February is when the freeze happens and all the bad stuff. So
I will say this, though. I was texting with a friend up in Ithaca this morning, and she said that it was warmer in Ithaca than it is in Houston right now. So that might be something for us to hold on to, at least for today.
okay. Yeah, I'll take that. I did when I let Jax out this morning. I did notice I didn't start sweating. I opened the door. I was like, ooh.
It was nice, right?
I couldn't tell if the air conditioner was on outside or what. It was enjoyable. So we're sitting down. We are on book number 2. Book number 2 is Gretchen Rubin's Better Than Before. We started this last Tuesday, so I've been a little over a week, and in that time period, there have been 2 reading assignments. We will be touching on both, and this does follow up Ruiz's The Four Agreements, which we had the end of group discussion on not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before. Side note, that was an awesome discussion. We had 15 there.
I think a little bit less, but around 15.
Okay.
And yeah, you were right. I mean, it was an awesome discussion. I had been having like a weird day that day, and like I was just like so filled from just this from everybody who came and participated. Everybody contributed and had awesome things to say, and it felt like people really got a lot from the book. And to help facilitate that discussion was impactful for me, and to hear how it was impactful in others was awesome as well. So I would encourage everybody to come out to our discussion group for Better Than Before, which will be on October 28th. And we'll obviously post more details as the date gets closer. But yeah, it was I thought a really great discussion as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And and that segues into what Rubin talks about. And one of the things is that we do desire deep connection. I think sitting down over food and opening ourselves up with what we took from a book, what we took from a reading, what our struggles were, what we've decided to do. It's something that I think is rare in this life. I don't think it's common to sit down and I don't want to say expose ourselves, but that's really it. Be vulnerable, because anytime you say, we feel that anytime you share your deep thoughts, someone could laugh at you. Like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, Adam. And then suddenly you're never going to share again, which was part of Ruiz's thing, a la my singing instructor back in elementary school. But I loved sitting there and listening to everybody talk, people that I didn't take for sharers shared, and I think that was really awesome. And I look forward to the discussion you'll lead on this book at the end of it. Today, we are going to go through basically the first 100 pages. And no, we're not going to go into great detail. That would be a very lengthy listen, and we want to respect your time, and we want to bring it in a concise manner so that you're able to enjoy it and get some powerful points and move on. So when you're looking at Rubin's book here, you begin on page 1 with the introduction, which is Decide Not to Decide. We then move to self-knowledge, and then the Pillars of Habit. Pillars of Habit was the second assignment in its entirety. So we're going to start towards the beginning. We just got done discussing the Habits Manifesto. Now, the Habits Manifesto is at the front of this book, and as you pointed out, of course, we would prefer everybody read the book, but as you pointed out, if you were going to read one thing, it's like you're like, hey man, I got the book, but I refuse to read it, then maybe you should crack the book open and look at that Habits Manifesto. So, Why does that stand out to you?
Yeah, if you were to read one thing this in the book, this could be it. Like, you could pin it up and like tape it to your wall as well. It stands out to me because it's because it's a couple easy. I don't want to say easy, but a couple bullet points that address basically the book. Like the book is in this habits manifesto, and then she uses the book to provide examples and anecdotes and evidence for why these things are important. But they're easy things for us to remember, like when we might be able to get stuck on something. What we do every day, the first point, what we do every day matters more than what we do once in a while. And it's easy as we go about our lives when we're looking to change habits and be like, well, like yesterday, like shit, that means like I don't eat well. It's like, no, what we do every day matters more than what we do once in a while. And so if you eat well every day or close to it, like that matters more than the one day that you ate poorly. You're working against gravity. I had like a great post the other day on Instagram, and say what you want about WAG or if you like their stuff or not, but either way, they talked about how there's like 334 days of the year basically that you have the opportunity to form a habit about eating right, because there's like 2 weeks that you're on, a week that you're on vacation, or 2 weeks, and then a couple days of special occasions. And so again, that's encapsulated in what we do every day matters than what we do once in a while. We beat ourselves up easily, as we talked about in the 4 agreements with the judge and the victim, and quotes like that one. What we do every day matters than what we do once in a while. If you can, that's almost like a mantra. Like if you can repeat it and you can see it, like it helps, gives you confidence to be able to move on and be like, all right, like I'm doing just fine. It gives you a little bit of hope. Things often get harder before they get easier. Like, okay, like, yeah, I'm in a little bit of stuff right now. Habit change is hard. I might have slipped back into an old tendency previously, but like, okay, things get harder before they get easier. So it gives us a little bit of hope, and it distills down the really important messages about habit change that Rubin expands upon in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered it. I think we're drawn to lists. I just said this before we started that we're drawn to bullet points and lists. With this one, each one really deserves its own episode and discussion, because it's it's at face value. It's interesting to see people's interpretations of them. But then as we go through this book and as we go through life and we work on these things, these are so important, and none of us have life figured out, but I'm fairly confident saying I think she's done a really good job of pointing out the things that are going to really help us in the future with, whether it's habit formation specifically, or just, for me, it's always like just getting my shit together. But like creating the life that I'm worthy of living. And so I think she did a great job there, and I completely agree with you that if you just looked at this, even if you focused on one, I mean, I think that's a fun exercise. Like each day, open it up and look into another one. And obviously, as we read further in the book, things will be discussed. I know there's one on here that you like a lot that we will discuss in a later assignment as she unpacks it. So we will come back to this. Y'all will see this again. And that brings us to the 4 tendencies. So Rubin moves on in the next chapter, and then on page 15, she begins discussing it, but on page 16, she actually defines the 4 tendencies. So upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels. We both talked about how these categories, and there's a Venn diagram and then on page 17 where there's overlap, and I think it's important to recognize the overlap, that you don't have to find yourself solely in one. But you would kind of discuss it. You had found yourself kind of in 2 camps on that. We probably have a little bit of all 4, but what are your thoughts on these things, and specifically where you fall on that diagram?
Yeah, so in the reading guide, I linked Gretchen Rubin's quiz to the 4 tendencies. It is online, so if you haven't already, I would encourage you to go online and take the quiz. And you can probably, after reading the descriptions of the 4 tendencies, you were probably able to see that you lean more towards one than the other, but it's always good to take the quiz and make sure that you are kind of what you think you are. Like we talked a lot on previous podcasts about defining terms, and that would certainly help do that. Just to overview the 4 tendencies again, we have upholders, who respond readily to both outer expectations and inner expectations, questioners who question kind of all expectations but will meet an expectation only if it's justified, and most often that justification or expectation is an inner justification or expectation if they have a good reason, if they can come up with a good reason for doing it, or what they determine for being a good reason, they'll do it. Obligers respond readily to outer expectations but struggle to meet inner expectations, so they need some kind of outer accountability. And then rebels tend to resist all kind of expectations, a nonconformist type. So I tend to lean towards being a questioner. I'll do something if I can come up with a really great justification for it, or if someone else can provide a justification for me. But if I think something is stupid or not worthwhile, like, I have a really hard time doing it. So I've been a questioner for most of my life. I also lean towards being an upholder a little bit, and an obliger a little bit, in that I do respond to inner expectations, but if there's some sort of outer expectation, I also very much respond to that. And I've spent a lot of time in my life trying to meet some sort of outer expectations. Going back to the 4 agreements, these are kind of expectations, like we've talked about, that have been put on us from others. And I've talked a lot about my previous career in college basketball and the expectation for what a coach was supposed to look like, or how someone was to operate in that type of space. And I spent a lot of time trying to meet those expectations as well. So I lean towards being a questioner, but at the same time, I also will respond to outer expectations, when I've determined that the situation calls for it. So how about yourself, Ben?
Yeah. So I'm very much an obliger. The outer expectation has always mattered far more to me than inner expectation. In fact, if there's no outer expectation, I have struggled. Something I've like therapy and things like that have worked. It's a result of adoption, trauma, all the stuff. Trying to be worthy in other people's eyes and not feeling worthy in my own eyes. So why would I meet my own stuff? And so that's the obliger's definitely where I fall for the most part. And then upholder, which is at the top of the diagram, and obviously if you're meeting outer and meeting inner expectations, I suppose that would be the dream. I would like to think I'm working to move more fully into that circle, but I would say I sit pretty solidly inside the obliger ring. But yeah, I think it's really great, and this is going to kind of bring us to we're going to jump into the second assignment here, but that quiz that you just said, whether they log on and take it, these days asking someone to get a device that they're probably already looking at and type in a web address, that seems to be too much for people sometimes. But I'd encourage people to take it because, one, it wouldn't be that hard to do. I was being facetious. But two, even if you don't, really go back through this and read it, because as we're going to talk about in foundations, as we're going to talk about really in monitoring, I think we take for granted the importance of identifying our circumstance or our starting point. And so if I'm going through life, I'm like, well, I'm an upholder. I meet expectations. Adam has an expectation, so I do it, and then I have an expectation. I'm just a great guy. But there's no evidence of that. Then I can't truly make progress because I'm not being honest with myself. And Ruiz talked about that too. I mean, this is obvious. Everything is everything here, folks. Everything's going to tie into everything. So we can reference all the different authors that we're going to go. And as we add more books, when we read McCown's Essentialism, we're going to be referencing this book. It's just going to keep building and building and building. But one of the big themes is, like, know where you're at. Be very conscious.
Yeah, I mean, and Rubin makes that point extensively during our first reading assignment, talking about the 4 tendencies, talking about, and then in the next section of distinctions, is that what works for me might not work for you, and that's important to know. And it's important to have a general framework for what might work for me. So if I'm like you talked about, if I'm an obliger and outer expectations work well for me, then I need to be able to know that to create an accountability structure for myself. So this is going to go into that accountability section, where we talk about being able to, create accountability within yourself or telling someone else who might hold you accountable. being able to know where you meet expectations, like that's important. Like you said, to define terms to know how we can then support our habit change as we move forward. But if we don't, if we have an idea of where we sit, but we don't know for sure, then it's tough to create structure for habit change.
Do you think, on the surface, when I read this, when I first pass, it is very much, okay, know where your strengths are. So, like I just said, my strength's external expectation. So, in this moment, if I needed to achieve something, then setting an external expectation would position me to be the most successful, have the greatest chance to succeed. However, to be unable to meet internal expectation is something that needs to be worked on. Correct? Like, we shouldn't just say, like, identifying where you're at. I don't say I don't know really know how to articulate this, but basically, we can use the strengths from where we're at now. However, I think as we grow through this book, as we put into practice what we're reading, I would imagine the hope is that we even out a bit. Does that make sense to you?
It absolutely makes sense, and I think what you're talking about might relate some to like CrossFit. Like, how much do we continue to build on it, or any like athletic endeavor? Like, how much do you, or like workplace development? It relates to like a lot of things. How much do we continue to build and like cash in on our strengths, if you will, like versus developing like our weaknesses? And if I spend so much time on my strengths, then my weaknesses don't get better. But if I spend so much time on my weaknesses, then my strengths might lessen. That's kind of the athletic comparison, if you will. But yeah, I think the hope is that we do even out a bit, or we become like a bit more well-rounded. There might be ways that we are able to meet inner expectations that, as we explore and experiment, we might find that some ways of meeting inner expectations work better for us than others. Like, if we are an obliger and we readily respond to outer expectations. So it might be being able to find techniques and ways that we can then move towards making both. But at least this gives us an initial framework, like, from which to work from.
Yeah, I completely agree. Okay, so she then progresses, and we're going to move towards the pillar of habit. In the distinctions chapter, I think it's worth going through, especially if you've never put time into thinking about this. She basically gives, small examples. Am I a finisher or an opener? Am I familiarity lover or a novelty lover? Am I promotion focused or prevention focused? And it's basically trying to create this rhythm of like categorizing yourself. I don't think it has to be restrictive, but kind of what we just said, like defining yourself so you know where you're starting from.
Yeah, and I think that maybe a natural tendency here is to like try to resist those categorizations, but like the one that she starts out with, lark or an owl, like that's a big one. Are you a morning person or an evening person? And like that's a huge step to understanding like how we schedule our lives and how we like build habits. If you are an evening person, then like trying to have the habit of working out with the 5 a.m. crew, like you're probably not going to have a lot of success, and then that might lead towards further failures like in other areas. And so in the Habits Manifesto, I'm turning to the page real quick, but she says make it easy to do right and hard to go wrong. And it's very easy, if a habit is easier to do, we're more likely to do it, right? And so for a lark or an owl, like understanding that is important to then deciding how we, which habits to choose, or how we then begin to impart habit change on our lives. So yeah, we don't often sit and think about these things or in the terms in which she's described them. So I encourage everybody to sit and wrestle with some of her questions to make sure that we have a solid understanding of ourselves. Self-awareness is such a huge skill to develop, and in the frameworks in which I work with my personal development clients, like developing self-awareness is a huge step towards moving beyond wherever we are right now, understanding our strengths and weaknesses, and then incorporating some bias interaction towards our strengths while developing our weaknesses, like we talked about earlier. But if we're not aware of ourselves, what we like, what we don't like, how we are, how others see us, then it's very hard to work towards habits that will be able to stick.
Absolutely. Okay, so we moved to the second reading assignment, which is the 4 pillars. Okay, so the 4 pillars: monitoring, foundations, scheduling, accountability. And we're going to touch on each of these. She opens with monitoring, and basically, we've all heard. She says, "What gets measured gets managed," is what I think of. It's a same quote. We manage what we monitor. It's something that I think we take for granted. She uses, and it's exactly what I heard. A guy writing about business school. To paraphrase a business school truism, we manage what we monitor. And you and I had kind of touched on how it's easy if you're not intentionally tracking, recording, monitoring, measuring. And this can get, we do need to go into, is there an extreme? But let's say we're not dabbling in extremes right now. If I'm not acutely aware of just how little sleep I'm getting, and this is a real world application because this is what I brought up in the pre-podcast discussion, then I might tell myself, I'm sleeping enough. And then you're going to be like, well, how much you sleep? And you start writing it down. I'm like, oh, and a week later, I'm like, average 4.5 hours. Man, I thought I was getting 6. And you're going to be like, yeah. And I'll go into accountability. We'll get into that too. But like just in this, like if I start measuring something, I become very aware of exactly what I'm dealing with, kind of what we just said in terms of the categories or the distinctions. So under monitoring, being made aware of the actual data, no more fooling ourselves, as she says on page 47. What do you think the reader needs to take from this section?
Yeah, there's another great quote that I love about monitoring. It's measure what matters, and that's from John Doerr, who's he's a businessman, and he's a Rice alumni and has a leadership institute at Rice. So that's how I'm familiar with that quote. But measure what matters. If it matters to us, then we have to actually know how much of it we're doing and how much of it we're not doing. And just simply, if we're dealing with a habit where we're trying to lessen an activity or make more of a certain or do more of a certain activity, then we have to know where we are right now. It comes back to that defining terms thing. So Rubin talks about it a lot in terms of her own sleep, and you just talked about it in terms of sleep as well. But Rubin says that she thought she was getting 8 hours a night. She was actually getting 6, or some nights even less. And you just talked about it with your own sleep, Ben. And where we see it, I think where we see it a lot in the gym is when we start monitoring like nutrition and our diets, and that's why the MyFitnessPal app is so great, because it allows us. We often don't. You look at. I'll use an example of like a donut, and you're like, oh, a donut's not good for you, but you just don't know like how not good for you it is, and you're like, oh my God, it's got 50 grams of carbs and 20 grams of fat. Well, like I can't do that, and so simply by monitoring and being aware of the amounts of something, it then allows us to lessen an activity or do more of an activity.
Absolutely. I think that I was just going through. I don't until I got into CrossFit. I don't think anybody ever told me to record anything. Can't think of school, like nobody, and I'm not sure where it would have fit. Like maybe a psychology class, but like I don't think this is I don't think this is common life advice. I don't think it's common for someone to be like, and obviously we in CrossFit and fitness, we're exposed to like very detailed measuring. We're like, oh, do you have your scale? Do you do both body weight scale as well as food scale? Like we're very like meticulous at times, but say you remove that. I don't think anybody ever even told me like to record how much I slept or record how much I ate, like, or what I ate, not how much, what I ate. Because that's a big thing we just implemented in the last nutrition challenge. It's like, all right, if you are overwhelmed by the idea of measuring the grams, just write down what you ate. Don't even worry about amount, because when you see pizza 3 times that week, you're going to stop eating pizza because you're going to be aware of it. We are incredibly forgetful. We are incredibly forgetful. Things that should be incredibly important to us. So I eat a bunch of junk food Saturday and I feel like crap. I feel like death. This Saturday comes, I do it again. And it doesn't even cross my mind that last Saturday it hurt me. Like I already I blocked it out of my mind because I want to go all in on this. And so if I don't write this down, it is not something that will inherently stick with me. Maybe if I have that habit, but I do not. I can speak personally. I don't have a habit of, before I got into fitness, of writing things down or remembering things. And so I think there's so much power here. And I also like that quote, measure what matters. But I think if you change it, I know it's been read elsewhere, but like we also what we measure what matters to us. So it's like if you're not measuring it, it doesn't matter to you.
Yeah, I think one of the great contributions of Glassman and CrossFit is the idea that like whatever we do should be like measurable, observable, and repeatable. And before Glassman, right, there hadn't been really anybody who had like measured fitness. Like there was no definable term for it. There wasn't a way to know if you were actually getting fitter. And so like CrossFit by itself has created like a group of people who have turned that over to other aspects of their lives. Well, it's like, okay, like I need to measure, observe, and repeat. And like we grew up with the scientific method in elementary school, middle school, high school, but no one ever said like, hey, like, you know, this is something that you can transfer over to your like to how you want to be in your daily life, in our daily lives. And that's um that's one of the really impactful areas of CrossFit to me, is that you're like, oh, if you know, if when I measure something, I can track to see if I'm getting better at doing it. Well, like, what if I did this with my nutrition? What if I did this with my sleep? What if I did this with like personal development? And I'm gonna tie this in to the quote that I love at the end of the chapter: is I should monitor whatever is essential to me, and that way I ensure my life reflects my values. And again, you talk about measure what matters. Well, like what matters to you, like that's being really important. And I think that we find when we're able to reflect on the two things, when we are able to monitor things and then put that up in contrast with our values, like we see how those two things are either in concert or working against each other. And so if I say that I want to be X, Y, and Z, but then I monitor my daily actions and I find that I'm A, B, and C, I then need to make some sort of change in one of those two areas. I need to either reassess my values or I need to reassess what I'm doing. But unless we monitor and unless we have an accurate description of X, Y, and Z, then it's going to be tough to ever make that change. And so to go back to the example of like the junk food and feeling like feeling terrible after eating it, again, if you want to be someone that eats healthy, yeah, like you might know acutely that you eat junk food on a Saturday night, but if you look at your life over the past month and you've seen that every Saturday night you've eaten junk food, well then it's hard to describe yourself as someone who doesn't eat junk food. And so then you have to reconcile that with yourself. Well, which one am I, or who do I want to be? And then once you figure out who you want to be clearly, and you have an accurate description of who you are, then you can close that gap between yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really, really well said. As we jump into the next section, which is foundation, it just struck me that, and it's not that striking, I should have been more aware of this, but she's very much she's being very intentional about the order in which she places these. And we said this a couple months ago here when we really got into the journaling idea, getting people to buy a journal just to write down their thoughts. It didn't have to be a super diary, but just like I got no practice of waking up in the morning with my coffee and writing stuff down, and it helped me get ahead of my day. And you've read millions of times of other people doing stuff like that, much smarter than I am. But what I think she's saying here is like, because foundations, there's already areas of focus and steps we need to take. So what I love about her placing monitoring before foundation is that I think that even if you're overwhelmed at the idea of life change, even if you're overwhelmed at making change at all, if you just start to write stuff down, if you start to record, track, change occurs. Even if you forgot to proceed, even if you never turn the next page, I think that you already are making progress. And I feel like that's kind of how she has this set up, which is brilliant. Because one, very real, like I didn't mean it this literally, but if you literally forgot to read again, maybe this is the last assignment you read, you put the book down, you still got something. But also, if we're not in the habit of measuring, then it doesn't matter if we read accountability. It doesn't matter if we read scheduling. It doesn't matter if we read foundations, because we're going to be flying by the seat of our pants because we're not going to be aware. So I love that she put that first. But then my second favorite love is that she put foundation second, because I love the idea of a foundation. You know, the think it was technically a parable, but it's just an analogy of the house built on the sand is washed away by the storm, but the house built on the rock is sturdy. And so the rock obviously had a firm foundation. That's all that story says. You've got to start at the foundation. Back to Glassman, he said, like, what do I do after I've mastered everything? You go back to the beginning. You shore up the foundation. And so, my takeaway was that we're stripping things back down to the base because we've probably built worst case, house of cards could just fall down. But there's just inefficiencies in the processes that we've adopted over time. So she talks about, 4 main focuses: sleep, move, eat and drink right, and unclutter. And then she mentions foundational habits tend to reinforce each other. And so we want to touch on this, and then we only have 2 left after this, so we got a little bit of time here. So what are your thoughts pulling from that foundation chapter?
Yeah, excuse me. For me, a big takeaway from the foundations chapter is the notion of foundational habits. They're habits that reinforce each other for better or for worse. Hopefully they are for better. So for me, CrossFit is like a foundational habit in my life, and I think a lot of our members experience that. When I work out every day, like, I'm a more positive person. I tend to eat better. I get more sleep or I sleep better because I'm tired after I work out. And so there's like 3, 4, 5 things that happen that I do or that happen to me as a result of just doing one thing. And so to look, she says it first things first. What's important right now? And you've talked a lot about it in our nutrition challenge, which is you get in the solid foundation, meats and vegetables, and then you can start to add in the fancy stuff. And I think very often we look at ways that we can add in the fancy stuff or make really difficult habit change besides looking at like what's actually important and what's going to impart like massive change. I don't want to say massive change, but what's something that we can do that's going to have like a cascading effect. And so for me, I can talk about my sleep. I can talk about changing my nutrition. But if I do CrossFit, I'm going to knock out 3 birds with 1 stone. I'm going to work out. I'm going to sleep better, and I'm going to eat better. And man, like, what a really powerful habit. So foundational habits are those like that essence of kind of becoming who we want to become because they have such cascading effects in our lives.
Yeah, and it's funny because we had a pretty lengthy production meeting before we started this recording, and I started, like, one of the first things out of my mouth was kind of being critical or dismissive of her identifying, basically sleep, nutrition, activity as being important, because to me, it was like, oh, that's duh. And part of it is because, yeah, we identified that here, and she's not pretending to have come up with that on her own, and for me to be dismissive because I've already thought of that kind of thing is silly. But as we discussed it and as we went farther in the meeting, and now that we've gotten this far into the recording, like, man, there's so much power in that. And you mentioned activity, man, when I can move, everything in life gets better. Everything in life gets better. And I think activity is the fun one. But, the same thing is said for sleep, and me struggling with getting to sleep on time now. And I've made a few changes, and it's just been hard for me to get back on track. But when I do sleep, I think I wrote this the other day somewhere for the athletes to see. Oh, on our discussion group, when I do sleep, man, I wake up and it's 4 a.m. and the world is beautiful, But then I'm kinder. I am a much better professional, like, both in being kind, but also in, like, speaking at a level of expertise, demonstrating, taking care, connecting. I enjoy my day. I don't hate myself, like, I'm able to help others outside of what's scheduled. Like, I'm able to step away and not be, like, overwhelmed by the idea of taking on something new. Like, everything's better. Why? I got 2 more hours of sleep, or I improved the hours I already had because I turned the lights off or I didn't look at the screen. So, and the nutrition's the same way. When I eat better, I think better, like, everything is related, and it's incredibly powerful. So I just want to apologize to the energies of the world that I was dismissive to start this, because it really, really is important. And I do like that they're reinforcing habits, that you make a change here and then suddenly you're finding, like, I go work out, and this one's gotten played out a little bit because, like, You can work out and go eat a bunch of donuts. But for the most part, if you start a life of activity, you're not as inclined to go have self-destructive tendencies with your nutrition. You might be excited even to have a grilled chicken salad because you're like, I'm on a health kick. I'm going to kick ass right now,
Yeah.
you know? And so I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah, it's answering the question of like what's important now and first things first, like she said. And I love the story that she articulates on page 59 where a drunk guy lost his keys and he's like looking under the street lamp and the policeman says, "Is this where you lost your keys?" And he's like, "No, I lost them back there, but it's easier to look here." And it's like, but that's what we do so much. Like when I was, you talked about sleep and making you a better person, and like, so what's important now for us? What are the things that really, really matter? Sleep is one of them. If we're sleeping, we're going to be more productive. We're going to be happier. We're going to be better people. And so when this last year, when I was at Cornell in college basketball, if I had a lot of work and I was overwhelmed, previously in my life, I might have done something, a stress management technique to make me feel better. Like I had a bad habit. I might have eaten, or I might have thought I might have eaten junk food, or I might have thought that I had to stay up late to really finish everything that I was working on. And I would do that to the point of diminishing returns with the work, with the quality of my work. But what's important right now? What's a foundation? What's something I can go back to? Well, it's sleep. And so something that I changed is when I was getting to that point where I was feeling overwhelmed, I then went to sleep. And then I woke up and I was able to get the work done in half the amount of time. I was able to have a better relationship or conversation with our players because I was more alert and I could be empathetic because I wasn't miserable because I had slept. I would eat better because I wasn't stress eating and tired. And there are studies that show that when we're tired, then we put on more weight just through our hormones, and then also stress eating more. And so, like, sleep is one of those foundational habits that has cascading effects on our lives. It's what's important right now, and to build those habits into our lives is so key, as you just touched on as well.
Yeah. And so number 4, I think is the one. I think is the one that maybe if you ask general population, hey, name some foundational habits, I think it's like survey says, you get pretty good amount of votes for nutrition, pretty good amount of votes for you should work out, and pretty good amount of votes for sleep. I don't know how many think of unclutter, but man, is that important. And she goes in the broken window effect, and basically the idea, the idea is if you're in a place that is not cared for, then you will not think to care for it or even yourself. And we talk about energy all the time. It's if you're in a spot with bad energy, and we're sitting right now in the office, and it's a mess. It's a mess. It's been a mess for a while. It's just stuff that I haven't stayed on top of. But you know what? I'm acutely aware that the clutter has a profound impact on my ability to remain, I don't want to make it as simple as optimistic, but productive in my day. And it makes it difficult for me to prioritize keeping things in its place because things are not. And that means keeping things in my life in its place because things physically are not. And so that unclutter to me was the one that really popped, both because in our business we talk about sleep, we talk about nutrition, we talk about did I just forget the third? Sorry, working out. We talk about that a little bit. But unclutter. Maybe that's it. It'd be difficult in a CrossFit class to tell someone to go organize their pantry. But
what do we do in class? We emphasize being organized in our stations and being organized in how we set up. And I think when our classes are more organized, our members and us, we have a better experience. So it might not be something that we talk about a lot, but it's certainly something that we emphasize and that we do.
Yeah,
Right?
You're exactly right. I mean, I guess it's been so long since I've been in a gym that just lets people put whatever they want anywhere. But yeah, we when we facilitate, and now they do it themselves. But we've got the columns for the barbells, or when they have a box and a barbell, we're very intentional about where each goes, and then their experience is improved as a result of that. Our experience is improved as a result of, as well, because coaching in a cluttered area, and that's honestly why we started doing it, was because if I didn't, no offense, didn't care about them. It was more like I didn't want to coach in that mess.
So it was a foundational habit for you, like for getting organized in that way, uncluttering in that aspect. I think what I hear you saying is that uncluttering there helped made you a better coach, which improved your relationships with our members most likely, and made you a happier person. And again, just kind of had this cascading effect.
And I think it's also something that's easy to it's an easy first step to do something that you can be proud of. I think we can be overwhelmed by a lot of things, but I think if you can, like today, if I can take 20 minutes, take even 10 minutes, and I can organize a section of this room, it allows me to build momentum. It allows me to feel accomplished. It also allows me to be proud and then now confident that continuing to make change is possible. And so when I'm standing in front of a class that is well organized and the logistics are taken care of, I can be proud of what we're doing, which then allows us, it basically exponentially increases the opportunity for impact, or really change is what we're talking about here. So I feel like it's a really easy piece of low-hanging fruit, because small steps make huge differences.
Absolutely. It creates a lot of positive momentum if you're able to cross one thing off the list that you did, and maybe it was just organizing and moving something. Like that's a big deal. It's also it also allows you to devote mental energy to other areas. And so if your mental energy is spent navigating messes, then it's hard to spend mental energy on what matters and on like doing important things. If you're always worried about stepping over barbells, then it's hard to demonstrate how to power clean correctly, or focusing on that, or focusing on correcting an athlete's movement. I have a couple, just a couple contributions more to this section is in terms of talking about clutters. In the Habits Manifesto, Rubin says it's easier to change our surroundings than ourselves. And you could debate that point if you wanted to. You could talk about how you can change yourself, but when you create the environment for the person that you want to be, like it allows you to then be that person. So we're going to continue to use this example of our classes. If we create the environment, an organized environment, then it allows all of us to be better coaches. And we could sit there and say, I'm going to be the best coach. I'm going to be positive no matter what. I'm going to be very enthusiastic. But if the environment doesn't allow us to do that, or if we're spending time if we haven't set up our environment to do that, then it's going to be hard. No matter how much we've told ourselves that we want to be that coach, it's going to be really hard to then be that coach. So you take care of it ahead of time. Like you change your surroundings so that you can be the person that you want to be. For those who have liked Rubin and reading better than before, and if this is something that really resonates with you as well in terms of uncluttering, she is coming out with a new book, Outer Order, Inner Calm, which is kind of that phrase that she uses to assess uncluttering and that foundational habit. And even if you don't buy the book, just hearing that phrase, Outer Order, Inner Calm, I think that is important, because you're describing that in terms of your office right now, how there is outer disorder, and as a result, there's a lack of inner calm. And so I think that's definitely like an effect that we have on our an effect on our lives, where as we get more and more disorganized, we tend to break down in other areas as well. And if we want to be a certain type of person, we got to make sure that our environment sets us up that way. That's why a great piece of nutritional advice is to like not keep cookies or junk food in the house, right? Like if your environment doesn't have it, like you're not going to eat it. Like so if you want to be someone that eats healthy, only keep healthy food in the house. And yeah, there's going to be some times where you drive out and you go pick up something, but if it's not in the house, it's more likely than not you're not going to then become or be that person.
Yes, agreed. That leaves us with two. So next, Ruben discusses scheduling, and I really want you to get into what we had talked about on scheduling on rest days or days off or days where we don't have our maybe normal list of obligations, and feel free to talk about anything else. But I think that was what you had discussed in the meeting before this was really really powerful because it's something that I did not originally think to do, and then when I found myself with more free time, I felt I didn't feel recovered after that. And I remember I don't know who wrote it. I don't remember where I read it or listened to it, but and she talks about something I think in the Habits Manifesto about making sure like the choices that we make are actually refreshing to us or not damaging to us. And so on a day where I don't have my normal work obligations, maybe the thought is I don't need to schedule my day. But you had some thoughts on that I think were really really powerful.
Yeah, the quote from the Habits Manifesto is we should make sure the things that we do to feel better don't make us feel worse. And I think often when we look at a rest day or a day off, or let's use a weekend for example, we're like, oh, it's the weekend, I can do whatever I want. This also ties back into creating that list of things that we love that we talked about at the end of the four agreements. If we don't uh, if we don't provide some structure and ensure that we're doing things that we love to do or doing things that are refreshing to us, it's then easier as a result for those rest days or those days off to get away from us, to add more stress to our lives, or to just not end up being as refreshing as they could be. And I think a lot of us look at a weekend or a rest day, and all of a sudden it's the day that we have no obligations. Like we're on a schedule during the week. Oh, I just want to be off of a schedule. I don't want to schedule it. Like, or maybe we just enjoy being spontaneous. We have some romanticism about being spontaneous, about not being tied down to a schedule or a location. I've dealt with both of those issues myself, but at the same time, being able to provide some structure to our days and some structure to what we're doing allows us to be those people that we want to be and make sure that we're doing things that are enjoyable to us. So I had a friend in town recently from out of town. She had never been to Texas before, and we scheduled we didn't have like a an exact schedule. We have to be here at this time and there at this time, but we did a bike and a brewery tour over the weekend, and it was a lot of fun. But we put it in the calendar as some sort of framework that, hey, like we want to do this thing. If we don't schedule it, it might get away from us. And it's the same thing with so many aspects of our lives. If it's important to us, we got to put it on a calendar to make sure that we're going to get it done. And so it might be as something as simple as scheduling a hike for a rest day because, like, damn it, I really want to hike. It's refreshing. It's cooler outside now. I know that I'm a better person when I hike or go for a jog or read or bike or whatever it might be. But if I don't put it on the calendar and make sure and schedule the time for it, it's going to very easily get away from me. My mom has a great quote, kind of work is like water or air. It fills up whatever the space of the container, right? And so, I think that's the case with a lot of instances in our lives. Don't if we don't confront natural limits, then things just kind of take whatever shape that they want that they want to take. They fill up whatever time we've set aside for it. A great quote from the book is scheduling also forces us to confront the natural limits of the day. And so if we don't set aside time on our rest days to do the things that we really want to do, then it's hard to imagine how we're actually going to get them done. And so as someone who's struggled with scheduling mightily in the past, I recognize the value in wanting to be spontaneous and not wanting to be tied down to a set schedule, but at the same time, freedom within structure and having a general framework is very, very important to actually ensuring that that we're who we want to be. Our lives are the sum of our days. You put together great days, you're going to have a great life. How do you put together great days if you don't actually schedule time for what makes a day great? How do you put together a great day if you don't actually put down the things and do the things that make your life great? So if you don't do that, and our lives are the sum of our days, well then it's I think you can infer from there what I'm getting at. Put together great days to have a great life. And in order to do that, you have to make sure that you're doing the things that are really important to you. This goes back to the quote from monitoring that we talked about as well. That if you look at your life, and if you monitor what is essential to you, in that way you sure that your life reflects your values. Scheduling is the proactive version of that. So if you schedule things that reflect your values and who you want to be, then what you monitor at the end result is going to be that person that you want to be. It's going to be filled with things that you love to do. So scheduling is the proactive version of monitoring, of looking back. It ensures that you are living the way that you want to live ahead of time.
Yeah, yeah. Um, what comes to mind is Jocko Willmick's quote, "That discipline equals freedom," which I had originally heard on the Tim Ferriss podcast, and he just talks about that structure allows creativity, structure is what allows enjoyment, because as you said, time's going to fill up, and if you don't take control of that time, it's going to pass you by. Someone else, it's all someone else is going to tell you what to do with it. You're going to be at the whims of life, whatever. But if you structure it, and for me personally, if you're ever in a relationship with me, I mean, hell, if you just hang out with me on a day where I'm not working much, which is rare, but we'll say a Saturday where I get to be done by 10, I spend every day of the week responding to people. I mean, I'm in customer service, so there's no real me time. It's always going to be there's an email, there's a message, someone's got to walk in, and some issues are great, some issues are minor, some issues are not worth the time, but that's just it. And so if I do have hours where nobody's here, I have this tendency to say, all right, I'm not leaving this place. I'm turning all the lights off, and I'm sitting on this couch because I get quiet. I don't have to be disturbed. But if you're in a relationship or a friend of mine and you're sitting with me, after an hour or two, if I'm not on top of it, you're wise to say, let's get out of here. And I didn't put it on the schedule, but I should have. And so what I've gotten better at is I respect that I have this tendency. And it's okay. I think it's okay to want to do nothing. And I think doing nothing is important at times. However, what the point is that even that can be scheduled.
Absolutely. I was about to raise the point that sometimes we need to schedule doing nothing. It's when you get into the habit of scheduling, it's very easy to cram all your days, and we've talked a lot about creating space, or we've talked about on the podcast before about creating space, and you need to schedule doing nothing too, or you need to schedule lots of time in between your activities to make sure that your days aren't too crammed as well. So I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. Okay, so on Saturdays I get done at 10. My best Saturday I get out of here because the guys are in here lifting from about 10 to 12, and so then I'll come back at 12, and then I'll have literally on the schedule in my notebook probably 2 hours where I have no obligations. I'm not going to do anything. If something comes up, I'll do it, but 2 hours. But then around 2 o'clock, if I do sit down at 12, by 2 o'clock, if not sooner, I'm back up, and I'm either working on something or I'm just getting out of here. And I will put that on the schedule. I will say, just get out. And even if I don't have anywhere to go, I don't need food, I don't have anybody to meet, even just getting outside it allows me to take advantage of my day. Meanwhile, a year ago, I would have sat on this couch for the rest of the day. And that's great because a bystander would say, oh, well, you're busy all week, so sure, you deserve that. I didn't feel good about it. I didn't get off the couch at the end of the day and go, man, what a useful day. I feel recovered. So I don't need to go do something stressful, but I think the idea that I don't need to schedule that is silly. And I think I've benefited tremendously from scheduling it. And then the second thing is away from the rest day, there's a clip from Joe Rogan where he talks about his daily, not habits, his daily schedule. And when he speaks he'll talk about he's going to go do jujitsu in the morning and he's going to go to the gym in the evening. And then he says, I owe that. And now that can be extreme. We don't need to get into that. We don't need to get anybody to feel like they owe working out. But what he's saying is he puts that on the schedule and therefore it will be done. And as she says in the beginning of the chapter, what gets scheduled will be done. You're going to take care of what's on the schedule. And that has always resonated with me because the things that at the end of my day, when I take inventory of what I accomplished, what I didn't accomplish, often the things that I didn't have the guts to put down because I didn't believe I would do it are the things that I had most wished I had done. And so I think that scheduling is really, really powerful. Now, this does lead us, we still continue this discussion on this topic, but this does lead us to accountability. Because what if I keep putting it down and I keep not doing it? And so then there's that back to the four tendencies of am I motivated by external or internal, and then having accountability or not having accountability. And so there is that as well. Because I can write down work out and never work out. And just keep going, didn't get to scratch that off the list. Guess I'll try tomorrow. And eventually I'm building momentum in the negative direction of like, oh, now it's on the schedule, but it's not important because I haven't done it.
Yeah, for sure. So scheduling can definitely be like a way of meeting inner expectations, right? We schedule it, we write it down, and we're able to meet that. But then we might be someone that responds to outer expectations. We're an obliger. And maybe putting it on the schedule is a way for us of creating outer expectations. That could also be a way that we look at it. It's on the calendar. This is like an other type of object. And so as a result, that creates an outer expectation. But maybe it's not. Maybe we still look at it as an inner expectation. And so then we need an accountability buddy. We need somebody to go work out with us. And that now we have an additional outer expectation. And so if the two habits can build on each other. We can schedule it, we can write it down, work out, go to the 4:30 class, and then we can do it with a buddy as well. And so that's another way of of knowing ourselves, being aware that like, hey, I'm an obliger. I need an outer expectation, and so I need my buddy to call me up at 4:15 and say, hey, we're going to the 4:30 class. Eventually, the goal, like you said, is that we're able to strengthen our habits and develop as people and not need a buddy to call us up all the time to go to the 4:30 class. Eventually that becomes who we are. We're able to meet those inner expectations a little bit more. But as we're forming the habit, we might need something like that. So yeah, scheduling does lead into accountability. And obviously all of this builds on the four tendencies like we've talked about.
Yeah, and so I mean we've obviously jumped into accountability, which is the fourth section, and it's funny you bring up 4:30 class. So we had, for those that are not aware, on Tuesday we had a pretty hellacious workout here, about 25 to 30 minutes, had two 800-meter runs, all that stuff. And if you've followed the story at all of myself and my struggles with it, not a workout I would have hopped into, not a workout I would have willingly participated in, not a wise choice for myself. I keep ending up in these workouts that are not well suited for someone that's not been on top of taking care of himself. But I was able the day before to utilize both Lulu and Joelle. Lulu originally had brought up the workout and how she didn't like to run, and so I had said, oh, I'll do it with you. Said it before I thought about it, and I hadn't looked at the workout actually, and it had been a while since I'd written it, and so I wasn't totally certain what I was getting into, but I figured I was helping her out by just saying, all right, if I do it, you got to do it. Then I became aware of what the workout was. But in that moment, I also looked over at Joelle and said, hey, Joelle, tomorrow I am working out with 4:30. I don't think you actually could prevent me from not doing it, but I'm just going to say it that way. And I said it in front of the 5:30. So now I had I think that class had 15 in it. So I had 17 people that were at least aware that even if it's, and I think that's the other part of accountability. And I think she says that. They don't actually even have to be, no, you said it. He was in front of you. So talk about when you're traveling, you told the ops manager, okay, you were trying to make a few changes or stay on top of your stuff.
Yeah, so I'll go back a little bit. Is the culture of college athletics is very much like do it, don't tell people about it, right? And that's something that I had grown up with as well. Like if you don't need to tell people you're gonna do something, just go out and do it. Actions speak louder than words, right? Like stop messing around, just go out and do it. And I have an ex who she would always be telling me about these changes that she wanted to make, and I would say, "Why are you telling me? Just go do it, and then I'll notice when you do it." And that was like a big point of contention in our relationship, and rightfully so, because I was providing negativity instead of support on change that she was trying to make. And as I was making changes last year, we're as humans, like, we're very interesting because we have access to all of our thoughts and emotions, and we can know how weak we might be at times, but like other people don't know that. Other people aren't aware of what we're feeling and thinking. And so as I was trying to, I made it really a point to stay on my nutrition last year during the season. That's something that I really wanted to do. I logged and hit my macros like very close within range. Hit the numbers I was supposed to be eating. I think every day except for like Thanksgiving and like 2 days around Christmas, from when the season started last year all the way through, which on the road in college basketball is very hard. There's buffets every hotel the night before every game. The meals that we get on the buses afterwards tend to be pizza or cheesy burgers and sandwiches, just not the healthiest food. There's snacks and carbs everywhere that you could imagine. You get a box lunch, there's a cookie in it, all this type of stuff. And so our director of basketball operations, who handled all the food and the travel, he sat 2 rows ahead of me on the bus. I would often tell him, I'd say, hey, David, D-Rob, his name's David Robertson, so we called him D-Rob. Said, hey, D-Rob, don't let me eat a Rice Krispie treat today on the bus. And he couldn't even see. He was 2 rows ahead of me. Could not see if I was eating a Rice Krispie treat or not. And it's not like he was going to be turning around and facing me the entire bus trip. But just by telling him that I wasn't going, that, hey, don't let me eat the Rice Krispie treat, I created that outer expectation for myself, which partly as an obliger, like and I created an accountability structure. It was a way of helping me make sure that I wasn't going to do this, because although like I trusted myself, at the same time having some sort of outer accountability, meeting an outer expectation, like also it provided just a second layer of defense, right? I had my own layer of defense, my inner expectations, but in case my willpower broke down, it gave me a second layer of defense. And doing things like that, which previously I'd really frowned upon, and I would, judge people very much for doing that type of behavior, right? Say it, don't do it, or do it, don't say it. Actions are more important than words. Suffer in silence, like all these things that I've been brought up with as an athlete and in athletics. Well, like that wasn't helping me then. So I needed to create something like to help me like achieve what I wanted to achieve. And just saying something to, creating that outer accountability like we talked about, that was so huge for me in a lot of this and a lot of my personal habit change. And now, like, if I have something that I want to do, like, I'll create that second layer of defense as well. I'll ask a friend to text me, to remind me of, hey, don't do this or do this. And so it's become like a really powerful accountability structure, a habit structure in my life.
Yeah, I love that, and I think it's the same thing. Like, look, the 15 people that were in that 5:30, maybe 2 of them would have asked me the next day if I worked out. I don't think, if any. But guess what? Before that 4:30, when I'm going, I don't want to do this, man, and I'd be lying to you if I wasn't hoping Lulu wasn't about to walk in, and I'd be lying that when I saw her car pulling, I didn't cringe and go, oh, I guess I'm stuck doing it now. But it got me going, and I think you touched on it earlier. One, and I don't want to unpack this right now, but I want us to admit to ourselves that we are being held accountable whether we like it or not. The bad behavior we have that is reinforced by society that Ruiz talks so much about, that's accountability. Why do you go out every Friday and Saturday? You don't want to. Why do you do it? Because society holds you accountable. It expects you to, and you feel that expectation. Did anybody tell you that you're expected to? No. Friday comes, and you feel that if you don't, you failed. That's accountability. Not in a great way, and again, in this book, we're going to get farther into like positive, negative, and things like that, but I think that it's really important because I think sometimes in that I don't want to vocalize it. There's part of us that will feel like, as you said that, and I don't think this is why in sports it's that way. I think in society it's this way. People don't vocalize it because they feel like they're not going to do it. What if I fail? I'm going to run a marathon. Well, what happens if I don't? And I did that. I told everybody I was going to run 100 miles. And in 2016, I did my best, and I got 70 miles into the race. But, man, when I had to bail, when I had to get out, and admit I wasn't going to make it 30 more miles, the first thing was all of the people that I told I was going to do this, man, I have failed them. And here's the deal. I didn't. I didn't fail them because I put the effort in. And the thing is, they also are the only reason I kept training. They're the only reason I even got to the starting line. And so I think it's important to not let pride stand in the way of utilizing accountability. And I think that's really, really valuable because for me, for a long time, I was too proud. And then on the flip side, there are men and women, especially in this day of social media, that every day they're posting what they're going to do, what they're going to do, what they're going to accomplish. And you're like, honey, I haven't seen you eat a vegetable and you're going to accomplish this. What are you talking about? And every day it's a different goal and they didn't accomplish the last goal. Like, there are people like that, but that doesn't mean stating your goals out loud is wrong. You know, just like people that don't say it out loud, there's negative ramifications of that. Saying it out loud, there's negative ramifications. There's negative on both sides, but it is useful to have it out in the world. It doesn't have to be public. There can be something I say to you or something I say to my family, just like, hey, guys, can you check in on this? I want to see if I can get better at this. So I think when you say, because when I read it and it says accountability, I'm thinking like, I got to tell the world. And I'm like, ooh, don't tell the world because all those people tell the world and they don't even mean to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's very interesting to kind of discuss there.
Well, I think it's funny that you hit on the social media aspect, and we talked before we got on the podcast about someone who says, like, I'm going to be a billionaire, but it's like, well, what are you doing to get there? And that's the perspective I used to come from a lot, too. And so there's, like, some sort of balance, right? Like, you have to put your stuff out there, but then, like, on social media, like, that's all, you know, sometimes that's an action step and sometimes that's not. I use social media as an accountability tool as well. I'll put, you know, I post my, like, what I'm reading on social media, and that was, like, when I first started doing that, I said, oh my God, all these people that follow me, they're going to think that I stopped reading if I don't post it.
Right.
And it's like, and so then I would always start to post it, and now it's just something fun that I do. But originally, like, it was an accountability structure. And like you said, in regards to the 430, the rest of the 13 athletes, they weren't going to care if you worked out or not. They wouldn't have asked you. And likewise, none of my followers, I say followers as if I have a bunch, but none of the people that follow me would have noticed if I hadn't stopped posting what I was reading. But, you know, sometimes we have to create ways of, you know, we have to create ways for ourselves of being able to do the things that we want to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. The title of this book is great. The title of this book is awesome. Better Than Before. And, like, that's so important to remain, that's so important to keep in mind as we go through all of this, is that when we're building habits, we're just trying to be better than we were before. And did running 70 miles make you, quote unquote, better? You know, so you didn't, the goal of running 100 miles wasn't achieved. But I would argue that you were a much better person after you ran the 70. Like, it's not about, we're not achieving a destination. None of this is ever a destination. It's a timeline. It's a continuum. We've talked about it a lot. The infinite versus the finite game. Just trying to be better than we were yesterday. Compare yourself to the person that you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. The subtitle of the book is What I Learned About Making and Breaking Habits to Sleep More, and generally build a happier life. We're just trying to be happier and better people. We're trying to develop ourselves, and we often get caught up in the finite game and thinking that we have to win or lose. And if I say that I'm going to run 100 miles and I don't do it, then I lost. You didn't lose. You gained so much. You ran 70 miles. Physically, that's a huge accomplishment. I would imagine that a bunch of relationships in your life were strengthened as a result. Maybe some weakened. I imagine that you learned a lot about yourself. And so there is no win or loss if you try something and you fail and you can experiment and learn something from it. That's a huge framework and kind of skill that needs to be developed for us to move forward. Once we get out of that notion that everything is win or lose, that I succeed or fail, if we can develop that growth, in pop culture and psychology, it's the growth mindset, right? If we can have that growth mindset, then everything is experienced, we can move forward. I like the notion, the framework of the infinite versus the finite game a little bit better. That we're trying to just get better along this slow, distant trajectory. Um, and being scared to put something out there, like that's a legitimate fear. I get it, but it requires moving beyond that kind of finite mindset that this is a win or a loss. In order to do that, let's just be better than we were before. Be better than you were yesterday. And if you didn't, then at least grow and learn from the experience, and then move on and just do better the next time. And if someone were to listen to that who knew me before, that would be a huge shift from where I used to be. But like this book helped me get there. So let's just be better than we were before.
I like that. I also think it's a great way to end this discussion. So this brings us to, I think, spot on page 100. And today's the 12th that we're recording this. This assignment was scheduled to be completed tomorrow.
Recording on the 11th. Assignment completed on the 12th.
It's completed on the 12th. On top of your head, are you aware how many assignments are left in this book?
Oh, I have it up in front of me. We have 3 more assignments. The next one is going to be a little bit longer. It's 2 sections coming up next. That will be covered from October 14th through the 20th.
Okay.
And then we have, I believe, one more section, or we have 2 more sections after that as well, which includes the conclusion. So that would be 1 reading assignment from October 22nd through the 26th. And then we'll have our discussion group on October 28th. So similar time frame to what we talked about with the 4 agreements. But yeah, we have 2 more reading assignments to go that will cover, the next 2 weeks, so to speak.
Okay. So October 28th, put it on the calendar. That will be the end of book discussion. And let us know what you think, okay? Comments. Send us an email. You got our emails. Let us know. Get in the discussion group. If you're not on the Facebook discussion group, I believe I have everybody added. But we had a few changes, additions to the book club, and so I want to make sure everybody is in on that, and we can foster some more discussion in there on these topics. And I will email out the next reading guide when it becomes available. You guys are awesome. Again, let us know what you think. The feedback is really important. We really appreciate the surveys from the last book. And we look forward to sitting down next week and discussing the next assignment. Anything else before we go?
Nope.
All right. Then everybody have a fabulous day. And like you said, it's just about being better than before. So take a step today in that direction. Goodbye.